I spent 6 months testing every objection handling method taught by all the sales trainers out there, and the results were brutal. Most of these techniques don't just fail, they actually make prospects more likely to say no. Look, I'm Justin James, and I put 47 different objection handling techniques to the test with real prospects, real money, and real consequences. What I discovered will shock you, and it might save your sales career. Some methods increased my close rate by 340%. Others destroyed deals that were already 90% closed. And the technique that every sales trainer teaches as foolproof, it failed 73% of the time. Today, I'm going to reveal the brutal truth about objection handling to show you what methods actually work and expose the techniques that are killing your deals. Because what you don't know about objection handling is costing you an absolute fortune. Now, let me explain exactly how I conducted this experiment. Over 6 months, I tracked every single objection I received across 847 sales conversations. I categorized them, like literally tested different responses, measured them against different results with scientific precision. I tested techniques from Tony Robbins, Cardone, Belfort, Zig Ziglar, and dozens of other so-called experts. I used their exact scripts, their exact tonality, their exact methodology, and I tracked 3 key metrics: immediate compliance, actual close rate, and long-term client satisfaction. What I discovered shocked me. The techniques that sounded the most convincing in training were often the most destructive in real sales situations. And some methods that seemed too soft actually produced the highest close rates. But here's what really opened my eyes. My background as a psychiatric nurse gave me insight that most sales trainers completely miss. I could see what was happening inside the prospect's mind when different techniques were used. And most objection handling methods trigger psychological reactants. They make people actually resist even more. Let me start with the worst performers, the techniques that were taught everywhere but actually destroy your sales. These methods failed spectacularly in my testing. Let's take a look at them. Like the worst method number 1, the feel, felt, found technique. You know this one. I understand how you feel. Others have felt the same way, but here's what they found. This technique fails 68% of the time because it's patronizing and prospects can smell a script a mile away. When I used this technique, prospects would literally say things like, "Are you reading from a script?" Or "Did you just use a sales technique on me?" And it immediately destroyed trust and made them actually feel more resistant. Worst method number 2, the boomerang technique. This is when you turn every objection back on the prospect. They say it's too expensive. You say expensive compared to what? They say I need to think about it. You say what specifically do you need to think about? This failed 71% of the time. Prospects felt attacked and interrogated. One prospect told me, "I feel like I'm being cross-examined by a lawyer, dude." The boomerang technique turns sales conversations into an actual confrontation. Okay. Worst method number 3, the assumptive close after the objection. Okay. This is where you ignore the objection completely and assume they're buying anyway. Great. So when would you like to get started? This technique had a catastrophic 79% failure rate. Not only did prospects not buy, but many of them became hostile. I had people hanging up on me, walking out of meetings, and one person actually said, "Are you deaf?" I just told you I'm not interested, right? So look, don't use that one. Number 4, the pressure and urgency technique. This offer expires at midnight, and I can only hold this price for 24 hours. If you don't decide now, you'll regret it forever. This technique failed 73% of the time and created the most buyer's remorse. Even when people did buy under pressure, 43% of them asked for refunds within 48 hours. One client told me I felt manipulated and dirty after that conversation. Worst method number 5, the objection overload. This is when you have a scripted response for every possible objection and you fire them all at once. I understand your concern about the price, but let me tell you about the value, the ROI, the payment plans, the guarantee, the bonuses, blah, 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 okay? This failed 76% of the time. Prospects completely shut down. Their brains couldn't process all the information, so they just defaulted to the no. One prospect said, "You're giving me too much to think about. I need to step back from this." They felt pressured, right? Now, let me show you the techniques that actually worked. The methods that increased my close rate and created happy, satisfied clients. These techniques I developed using my psychiatric nursing background, okay? So, best method number 1, the validation and exploration technique. Look, when someone objects, instead of overcoming it, I validate it and explore it. It's completely valid concern. Can you tell me more about what's making you feel that way? This technique had an 87% success rate. Here's what happens. When you validate their concern, instead of fighting it, they relax. When you explore it instead of dismissing it, they often talk themselves out of the objection. I learned this in psychiatry. People need to feel heard before they can move forwards. And most salespeople are not doing this, okay? Best method number 2, the assumption reversal. Instead of assuming they want to buy, I assume they don't. It sounds like this probably isn't going to be a right fit for you right now. This technique had an 84% success rate because it removed all the pressure. You see, when you take away the pressure to buy, prospects often start selling themselves. They'll say stuff like, well, actually, I'm interested, but now they're convincing you instead of you convincing them. Make sense? Best method number 3, the consultant position. I position myself as a consultant, not a salesperson. Based on what you've told me, here's what I'd recommend. This technique had an 89% success rate because it builds trust instead of resistance. See, when you're in a consultant position, objections become collaborative problem-solving sessions instead of adversarial confrontations, right? Best method number 4, the emotional bridge, okay? I connect the objection back to the original emotional motivation. I understand you're concerned about the investment. Remember when you told me how frustrated you were with your current situation? That frustration is costing you more than this investment ever could. Now, this one had a 91% success rate. This works because it reminds them why they were there in the first place. The objection becomes secondary to the desire for transformation, right? Works really, really well. Best method number 5, the 3-word method. This is the technique I revealed in another video. What else specifically? Okay, this simple question had a 93% success rate because it gets to the root of the real objection. You see, most objections are pretty much surface level symptoms. What else specifically helps you dig down to the real concern? And once you address that, the surface objection completely disappears. Okay, you've got to try this stuff. I'm giving you some powerful stuff here, guys. Okay, so why do the best methods work while the worst methods fail? It all comes down to psychology. The worst methods trigger what psychologists call psychological reactance. When people feel the freedom to choose is being taken away or threatened, they automatically resist. Every pushy technique, every scripted response, every pressure tactic triggers them to have reactance, and it makes them want to say no even more. Now, the best methods work because of human psychology instead of trying to fight against it, we're working with it, okay? They make people feel heard and understood. And when people feel in control of the decision, they're more likely to make a positive one. Here's my key insight, though, from my psychiatric nursing background. People don't resist solutions, they resist being sold to. When you stop trying to overcome their objections and start trying to understand them, everything changes, okay? The validation and exploration technique works because it makes people feel heard. The assumption reversal works because it removes the pressure. The consultant position works because it builds trust. And the emotional bridge works because it reconnects them with their motivation. And the 3-word method works because, let's be honest, it gets to the truth. Now, all these techniques have one thing in common. They treat the prospect like a human being with valid concerns, not an obstacle to overcome. Now, let me give you some real numbers from my experiment. Before I started testing these methods, my close rate was typically around 23%. Pretty typical for most salespeople. After implementing the worst methods, my close rate dropped to 11%. I was actually making my results worse by following expert advice. But when I started using my best methods, my close rate jumped to 67%. That's nearly a 300% improvement just by changing how I handled objections. Now, more importantly, my client satisfaction scores went through the roof. Before about 15% of my clients had some level of buyer's remorse. After implementing these methods, that number dropped to less than 2%. Here's a specific example. I had a prospect who said, I need to think about it. Using the old boomerang method, I would have said, what specifically do you need to think about? And started interrogating them. Instead, I used validation and exploration. That's completely understandable. This is a big decision. Can you tell me what aspects of this are making you feel like you need more time? Okay. She opened up to me, told me she was worried about the ability to implement what she'd learned. And then we had a real conversation about her concerns. I addressed them honestly. She invested £12,000 that day. 6 months later, she sent me a message saying it was the best decision she'd ever made. The difference wasn't in what I sold. It was in how I handled her very reasonable concern. So there you have it, the brutal truth about objection handling. Most of what you've been taught is not just wrong, it's counterproductive. The techniques that sound the most impressive in the training room are often the most destructive in real-life sales situations. But here's the thing, knowing which methods that work and actually implementing them are two different things. It takes practice to master the tonality, the timing, and the psychology that makes these techniques effective, right? And that's exactly what I teach inside of my Closing Incubator program. It's a 12-week intensive where we don't just learn objection handling techniques, we practice them through extensive role play until they become second nature. We work on psychology, the mindset, and the practical skills that turn objections into opportunities. Now, I've used these scientifically tested methods to personally generate over 22 million in sales myself, and my clients have gone on to generate over 200 million using the same techniques. If you want to master objection handling the right way, if you want to stop using techniques that are sabotaging sales, comment tested below and I'll send you my objection handling test results. It includes 47 techniques I tested, their success rates, and the exact scripts for the top 5 performers. And if you're serious about transforming your objection handling skills, if you want the complete system, live coaching, practice sessions, me holding your hand, then let's have a sensible conversation about the Closing Incubator. Because remember, objections are obstacles to overcome. They're opportunities to understand, connect, and serve. And when you handle them correctly, they become your pathway to the close. So comment tested below and let me show you how objection handling methods actually work.